Okay, I got cut off from earlier because I got a phone call, and when my phone rang, it cut off my video. I told you that I would find the Ed Rivera article that was posted online. This is it. And someone sent this to me. I didn't find it myself. It's from 1215.org. It says here, Ed Rivera's brief on Article 3 sui juris forms. 1215.org/law notes/work-in-progress/article-ii-court-by-ed-Rivera. .pdf. Okay, so that is where you'll find it at, and it's got the article that he wrote where I mentioned that he talks about the courts, and he talks about how the government allowed for the courts to be used for nefarious purposes. And those purposes are to administer the non-positive laws that I've mentioned before in some of my videos. And the ones that I mentioned in part 1, where I said some titles have an asterisk, and that means that it has been made positive, and we looked at Title 1. And Title 1 has front matter, and you got to go over here and click it. And when you click on front matter, it'll have the positive law citation. And that's how you know it's an actual law, capital L law, the way it's written in the Constitution. And then when it has a capital L law and it's written in the Constitution, it's you know that it's then a real law, and it's administered in a constitutional court. Constitutional courts uphold the law and hold court, where when you go to these other, like Title 2, Congress has no asterisk, it has no positive law citation, it's not a law. And remember, we looked at Title 1, Chapter 3, Section 204, that shows that in order for it to be used as evidence in a court created by the United States, it has to have the positive law citation. This title here, Congress, look at that. Congress, if there's an issue, this title is not upheld in a court created by the United States. It's like it's a corporate court. And I was sent also by the same friend a law from her state, which says that the district courts are used for 2 different purposes. They were created constitutionally, but then they were used for business purposes. So this Title 2, the Congress, this is not passed into positive law. So you have provisions, general provisions. You have the president that was passed into positive law. So this is a law, constitutional. You have flag and seal, seat of government, and the states also passed into positive law, but Congress is not. And while we're here, let's look at some of the other things that are not laws: domestic security, agriculture, aliens and nationality, banks and banking, all for business. All of these are not laws, and they're not upheld in a court of law. They're administered for business purposes. They require your consent. Commerce and trade, conservation, customs and duties, education, food and drugs, foreign relations and intercourse, hospitals and asylums, Indians, internal revenue. Not a law. You know why? Because they administer it off federal lands, and so it requires you to agree because you sign all the papers. You send in a form saying that you want a contract with them. I think that's called the W-4. And then you ask for some of it back depending on what they want to give you. And if there's an issue with it, you go into a court that's not a court created under the Constitution. You go into a business court, but happens to be in the same place. Intoxicating liquors, not a law. Labor, mineral lands, or mineral lands and mining, navigation and navigable waters, crime control and law enforcement, public health and welfare, vaccines, the masks, giving the hospitals money to do what the government wants it to, or the corporate government wants it to, not a law. When they say the government isn't a government, it's a corporation, or the United States is a corporation, part of it is and part of it isn't. This is the corporate. The non-positive laws are the corporate side for business purposes. The positive laws are the ones that are actual laws under the Constitution. Public health, not a law. Public lands, not a law. Railroads, not a law. Telecommunications, not a law. Territories and insular possessions, not a law. War and national defense, not a law. Of all things, voting and elections. That's why Trump won't win. Because he's got to go into the courts for business purposes, and they will do what they want. They'll do whatever they want. Because he's not going into a constitutionally created court. Because the title for voting and elections that they cite, Title 52 USC, blah, 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 blah. Not a law. Okay. Some of the public laws used in the title are laws, but when they take you into court and they take you under Title 52 USC, they're bringing you under something that's not a law. It's just a book. You know, you can go into the library and find it on a shelf under fiction. Okay? Because these non-laws create fictional jurisdictions. Voting rights. Let's go to front matter. Remember on the other one we saw a positive law citation? There won't be one here because it's not a law. Because it was never passed into law. It should be here. And sometimes they write things that sound like a positive law citation or enacting clause, but it's actually not. Okay. So this is part 2 of my video. Part 1, I go through some of this stuff where I show you a lot of this stuff. These are just editorial compilations. This Title 52, not made a law, is an editorial compilation of a bunch of laws. So some of these public laws are properly enacted, but they bring you into court. They don't bring you into court under public law, blah, 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 blah. They bring you in under Title 52, or for tax purposes, they bring you in under Title 26 into their business tax court because you agreed and you signed papers with the corporate United States, not the constitutional United States. The constitutional United States can't bring you into court for anything because, remember, I told you in the last video, let's see. Let's see where that paper went. I have it highlighted in red, makes it easier. Okay, so if you're under constitutional law, that means you're on federal lands. And if you're on federal lands, the laws apply. If you're under the corporation, the laws don't apply to you unless you sign the contract with them. Okay. There are few, if any, federal crimes that can be committed outside federal territory. Congressional insiders know Congress can punish few acts outside federal territory. So the federal territorial trial courts have been disguised as courts of justice for those who voluntarily submit themselves. And you voluntarily submit yourself because you sign their contracts. Okay, you get a driver's license. And I know that your driver's license will say state of such and such, but that's the federal corporation inside the state. That's not the state. Okay, that's the federal corporation inside the state. And I have another video that explains that, but it was basically to provide for the essential services for the military people and the civilians that lived and worked on the military post, because back in the old days, they all lived on the military lands, on the federal lands. They weren't allowed to come off and use our services, like schools and hospitals and such, because they weren't taxpayers. So they couldn't use our public services until the state and the federal government made a contract with each other, and the states were paid by the federal government for the federal government to be able to use these services. And every time the service was used, the federal government would pay the state. So like, for example, I'm a disabled veteran and I left the military. I was honorably discharged, but I became pregnant later. But since I'm a disabled veteran, I was able to have my baby in a civilian hospital off of a military post. And I paid an amount of, after the federal government paid its portion, what I paid was like $20. Where friends of ours, where his wife was not military, prior military, or disabled, or a disabled veteran, they'd paid several $1,000s after they had their baby. So, so it's the contracts between the corporate United States was supposed to be the contracts between the state and the federal government to provide for services for the people who lived and worked on post, because the government at that time, the federal government at that time, didn't have enough money to have all of those services. You know, the disabled hospitals, the hospitals for the women to go have their babies, to schools, to send their children to schools, and all these things they had to do it outside of the state, or outside of the federal lands in the state, outside of the annexed lands. So then eventually they created these courts to hear these cases between the state and the federal government, or the people in the state, or the people between the state and the people on the federal lands. So when you see in the Constitution where it's talking about those courts, that's what it's talking about. Those people on the federal lands and those people off the federal lands, those people in between states, different states who have land jurisdictions, or land issues. But when it comes to just like me and my neighbor having a problem, or me smoking pot in my house, or any other thing that they say is a federal crime, if I choose not to pay taxes, that's my business. I don't have to pay taxes. I'm not one of them. And I can smoke pot in my house because I'm not on federal lands. But the minute you start getting a driver's license that says state of, and whatever state you're in, you're saying that you're one of those people on federal land that you need essential services. And so now because you're considered a federal person, you're now coming under the corporate laws. So that's when they say that they're abusing the constitutional right to make contracts. That's what they mean. They're bringing us all under that fictitious jurisdiction. We don't belong there. So it's been disguised as courts of justice for those who voluntarily submit themselves to federal prosecution. Among others, lawful users of medical marijuana and those who aid and assist them often find themselves federally charged with crimes that do not exist where they were alleged to have occurred. Okay, so I started out here by telling you about the Insurrection Act. You can go on here and you can read about the Insurrection Act, but while you're here, you might as well look around and see what else you can see as far as what I'm telling you about the positive laws. Like here's Title I, positive law citation. That's a requirement. For it to be made a law according to the Constitution, it has to have a positive law citation. It has to have a proper enacting clause. Okay, and there's a positive law citation with a proper enacting clause. Now, if you look at some of these laws and over here it says repealed, that means that the law is no longer in effect. And they do that. That goes back since the beginning of writing laws. Because once something was written and they weren't going to follow it anymore, they needed the next set of people or generations ahead to know which laws to follow and which laws not to follow. And the ones that they don't follow are repealed. So it would go back and they would stamp repealed by and then have the new law. That's another issue I have with the Articles of Confederation. There's no repealing clause for the Articles of Confederation, yet at the time the founders did use some repealing clauses for other things. So here we've been told for 200 years or so, at least, that the Articles of Confederation were repealed by the Constitution, but there's no repealing clause. There's no repealing clause for it. I've looked and looked. I've got people who help me research, one very intelligent person in particular, and we've never found a repealing clause. We've never found one. Looking through all the journals, the secret journals, all the papers, everything we can find, there's no repealing clause for the Articles of Confederation. And there is no, there's nothing in writing. There's nothing even in the founding documents saying that the Articles of Confederation were repealed. So I hope you learned something today. Follow the moral laws, do no harm, and it never hurts to just be kind to one another. Please share the videos. Knowledge is power.